Great, there we go. Cool. So again, I'm Chuk Obasi. I am a New York-based actor and writer and director. Um, I'm an insight practitioner in that I've studied insight for over 12 years now, and have been interested in the ways it could be applied to the performing arts, which I've been doing through artistry and with Viev Price, who's here too. See you, Viev, it's popping. What up, Jamie? And so, in the many ways up, there's more people trickling in here. Among the things that I enjoy doing, storytelling. And, theater in and of itself is storytelling, but there's also just the pure form of simply telling a story. And I certainly love to hear a story. And so what the idea that's being acted upon here is that I realize that there are so many people who do remarkable things, close and far, and remarkable is a subjective term. It could be, something that's as big as something that would make news headlines, or it could be something that's really personal. But we all make remarkable decisions, and we get to those decisions in different ways, and it's all fascinating to me. So this is a time to just tell one of those stories that I'm inspired by, and then to talk about it. That's pretty much what it is. The story was kind of drawn out through an insight conversation, which is a conversation where I really just posed a question to the person that I sought out, just based on my interest in their life, and then we just let the conversation go from there. This is my second time doing it, and the cool thing about it is that I could walk into this room. It was really on Zoom, but I can walk into a room and think a conversation is going to go a certain way, and it ends up going to a completely different way. So the story that I wrote, I had no idea I was going to write the story that I wrote as far as the subject matter, but it is what it is. But I will say how I got to the story, and then I'm just going to tell the story, and then I'd like to talk with you all about the story, I want to first continue to talk about how I came to it and what makes it an insight story, because I do apply insight as a methodology in different ways in my process here, and also questions about the story itself. When in conversations like this, I will say that the person may not necessarily be interested in being in the spotlight, and so in this case, the person wanted the story told, but didn't necessarily care to be named. And so what you'll find is that I'm telling the story in a first person kind of way, and names and identities have been changed. You know how that goes. Yeah, cool. So here's how I got to my story. Back in December, so just a month ago, I was sitting on a bench in Central Park, and I got mugged by two teenagers. And it was the first time something like this had ever happened in my entire life. And when it happened, when these two kids came up to me and they asked for my wallet, my first response was, "You got to be kidding me!" But then my second response was, why are you doing this? Like, is this really like the best way to get money right now? And one of the kids just like looked me dead in the eye and said, it's hard out here. And obviously, naturally, I thought, what do you mean by that? Right? And so I think from that experience, which was more profound than it was traumatizing, because it left me like really, curious about the story behind that incident. And so I sought out a story that relates to gun violence and that kind of thing. And so I found someone to talk to who I knew had a very particular interest in gun, not just gun violence, but gun culture. And he'd been writing a book about it that he hadn't finished, but he had been writing the book, and I was very much aware of it. And so I sought him out. And I'm going to tell a story that was inspired by my conversation with this friend of mine. Tonight, I stand in their doorway and watch my twin daughters as they sleep. They're not afraid of the dark, so the only nightlight is the moon. I can hear my wife adjusting her sleeping position in the next room. Why can't I sleep? I don't know, but it occurs to me that there are no boogeymen in sight, not under the bed, not outside the window, not in their dreams, I bet. In fact, the closest thing to a boogeyman in this house would be me. I often think of the life experiences that led me to this doorway. I can't say that I regret any part of my past because, I am the sum of my life experiences, right? Well, at the very same time, I often think, shit, I would change it all. Definitely some regrets. But anyway, this is nice. But at times like this, I know I should go to sleep. And it's not really that I can't, but really that I won't. It's like I'm fighting to stay awake. And even when I'm asleep, I'm half awake, always ready for something. I don't know. And so I flippantly just ask myself, what am I fighting for anyway? I should have known better, but it's too late now. This might sound strange, but whenever I ask myself that question, I see blood. I smell steel, cigarettes, gunpowder. I taste coffee. I feel my eyes heating up, which they like to do before I cry. And the things I hear, I can't even begin to tell you. I was 6 years old, not much older than my daughters were, when I heard someone pounding on my front door in the middle of the night. I don't know if my mom realized it at that moment, but I was standing right behind her when she opened the door to a young male stranger wearing blue jeans and a white tank top. His arms pressed against the edges of our door frame, he simply said, "I need help." Suddenly, a red dot appeared in the middle of his tank top, and it began to expand like magic. Within seconds, his entire shirt turned red, and he collapsed into my mom. Things got blurry after that, but I would later learn that moments before he knocked on our door, that man's back had been ripped apart by a shotgun. And as the blood rushed from his exit wound and through his clothes, like a Tarantino film, he pressed against our door frame to hold himself up because he was fighting for his breath. What else do I hear? The sound of water flooding and rushing down the creek. Me and my guys, we would go to war at that creek, covered in dirt, torn clothes, life or death. At least that's what we made it feel like when we were playing tag, or capture the flag, or had competitions over who was best at skipping the rocks, or jumping off boulders and landing gracefully. It was usually about 5 of us, and my dog, Muggsy, the team mascot, the heart of our crew. We were 9-year-olds navigating rugged North Carolina terrain, discovering the world, playing like there was no tomorrow. We ran, we flew, no walls, no ceilings, no doors, no fear. The creek, that creek was liberation. Until it wasn't. And that change happened one day when some older kids passed through who had their own idea of what liberation was. We heard their laughter from a distance and immediately had a bad feeling. Yet we weren't familiar enough with fear to leave, so instead we cautiously kept playing, cautiously kept laughing. Before we knew it, our laughter clashed with theirs as they approached us. A teenager walked right up to me, pulled out a handgun, and pointed it right at my face, as if to say, "What are you laughing at?" It grew completely silent as he held the barrel to my face. He held the barrel centimeters from my nose. I guess that's why I could smell the chrome steel, the cigarette residue from the trigger finger, even the gunpowder of a bullet that hadn't yet been fired. For a minute, literally 60 seconds, my eyes darted back and forth between the young man's eyes and the barrel until a nonchalant voice shattered the stillness. "Hey, don't fuck with them, they're just a bunch of kids." But when I looked in this man's eyes, I knew that he needed to shoot someone or at least something. I don't know what he was fighting for, but maybe there were some demons that he was fighting against. So he lowered his gun, turned, and began to walk away with his friends. My entire crew immediately dove behind a rock. We listened to their departing footsteps, and with each step, we would exhale a bit more. When the footsteps suddenly stopped, we held our breaths again. Maybe they stopped to pull out a cigarette. A single shot rang out, and our hearts simultaneously jumped out of our bodies. Then more shots. Bullets ricocheted off the rock that we hid behind. It felt like we were in a one-sided Western film finale. The shooting stopped for a moment, and as the dust began to settle, I remember that I didn't think I could possibly feel a more intense fear until I heard one more single shot, followed by the shrill yelp of my dog. My body was frozen, but my spirit shook uncontrollably as I listened to Muggsy cry until he couldn't. Less than a year later, I would come face to face with a gun again, ironically, while trying to buy cigarettes at a convenience store. When the police were called, they answered with guns drawn, staring down a barrel yet again, but this time with the street poise of a 10-year-old. I took the time to determine whether the coffee on this officer's breath that I could somehow taste was consumed as black coffee or with milk and sugar. I hypothesized that these officers were fighting to protect the neighborhood from people like me, which I guess meant that we were a threat. I concluded that they were just as bad as the teenagers who killed Muggsy. Time moved slow at times like this, which allowed for countless thoughts to settle into my unsettled mind. But what was I fighting for? I couldn't name it yet, but I did know that I needed to understand this culture that kept infiltrating my childhood. And thus, it was a matter of time before I held my own, before I shot my own. And I can still hear the backyard tree bark chipping away with each bang, and the power that would course through my veins like Thor, god of thunder, being united with his hammer. The hammer was heavy, but that's okay because I felt stronger with it. Was this normal? That I slept with a fully automatic pistol under my pillow rather than a stuffed animal or an action figure? Was it normal that my friends and I would turn cemeteries into rally points as we would shoot at police with BB guns from behind gravestones? Or that BJ hijacked a car and shot the driver? Or that Hombre got pistol whipped? Or that Pito got shot? Or that Verge had to die? Or that Tucker, the local hero who once saved an entire bus by taking over the wheel when the driver had a seizure, was the same Tucker who took someone's face off at a poker game a year later? Or that when my dad retrieved Muggsy and buried him, Henry cried and Ramsey was so angry that he was shaking, but I stood there emotionless? Or that parallels were drawn between 90s era North Durham kids and child soldiers who were similarly recruited? Was it normal to shoot simply because they told me to? Or was this our way of fighting the overwhelming feeling of powerlessness in our world? A world that shifted further away from the glory days of that creek with each incident. It didn't always necessarily feel like it, but fuck, we were always fighting something, and we couldn't always determine what that was. When I was in high school, I finally asked a friend, yo, what are we fighting these cats for? By high school, I was able to assess my friendships to the point that I could delineate. You see, these were my ride or die bros. But that didn't necessarily mean that they were like brothers to me. It was more functional. If you were part of a gang or even just a clique, you were expected to be willing to take a bullet for these guys. You know, it was part of the job description. So I'm like, yo, a huge brawl was upon us. And it was planned. We had knives, brass knuckles, baseball bats. Some of us had guns stashed away. Word was somebody deeply disrespected our boy. So say no more. That's how it worked. But this time, I decided I would get a more specific answer. I mean, blind loyalty goes a long way and all, but for once, I wanted to know what I was fighting for. I don't know. Maybe because a new level of wisdom automatically came with entering high school as a freshman. Maybe the narrative question was starting to become, what am I potentially dying for? Or maybe this pattern was as adrenaline inducing as it was, becoming monotonous, or all of the above. So I pulled one of my bros aside. The brawl had occurred, and we all lived to see another day, but I still had to know. Yo, what was this beef about? Oh, this dude, he borrowed Jabron's video game and he never returned it. That's it? Yeah. So I think that was a turning point for me. The spark that began in my subconscious, ultimately leading my spirit to explore new frontiers. And I found one, and ironically, that frontier was drama. A place where I could channel my fight into previously dormant creativity. A place where I would trade the barrel in my face for the spotlight on my soul. And just like that, I had found my new creek. In one of my poems, I write, my memories punch at the concrete walls of my mind with bleeding fists. They claw at the back of my throat like demons in want of souls. So, yeah, the sounds, the sights, the scents, all of the sensations of my past, they create this cacophony that grows more intense when I'm reminded of it. And while regret and gratitude coexist in my body, if you ask me which is the stronger of the two, well, I am here, and I am now. I breathe fresh air as if life could begin again, because despite what I may be, I have to live with what I've been. I always told myself my aim was true and broke no skin. Tonight, I watch my daughters as they sleep, and I know exactly what I'm fighting for. Thank you. Okay, so that's my story, and I think what I'd love to do now is just open up the floor, open up the room, open up these rectangles to thoughts, questions, where the story took you, and any questions about how I got to it, to where I got with it. You're welcome to use the microphone or the chat room, or just sit here. That's cool too.
Chuk, I just want to say thank you, and I could just feel my own, like, just sort of in that gratitude of like you not sitting there on your own, but just to take that time to process is So powerful.
Chuk, I hate to break the narrative mood. I mean, it was such a powerful presentation, such a powerful story. I'm very touched by the way you crafted it and told it and presented it to us. The shift from your opening, from your introduction into the narrative was amazing to me, and it was definitely an insight story in the sense that throughout I did get a clear picture of the images and thoughts and feelings and actions of the narrator, and so I'm grateful for that. So that was prologue to say I have kind of a technical question or a theoretical question that I fear will move us away from the story, but it's more about the how of the story. I'm wondering about your relationship in writing this, your decision to put it into first person. That's obviously a good vehicle for interiority, for thinking and thoughts, but you did it in such a dramatic way. And I wonder what models you have working around because there are lots of first person things that are boring as opposed to what you did, or just droll as opposed to dynamic and poetic. So what do you do when you do that? Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, I can talk about that. And thanks for asking. And I think it's totally fine to stray away from the story itself. We can always circle back to we make our rules in this room. You know, when I interviewed this person, it's funny. I had this whole idea of how I was going to write the story already, and this is a reminder to, like, try to keep those presumptions at bay as much as you can, because as I was hearing the story, I legit saw myself in this person, and I legit saw myself in the story, to the point that it felt like these could be my own words. And that was a realization I had in the middle of the conversation that I had with this person. And I think as this insight storytelling is becoming a thing, if there are to be rules, one is to be just go with the flow. Just go with the flow. And the flow said, yo, tell this in first person. And that was that.
Thank you.
So it felt very first person to me. And I even got confused momentarily whether it wasn't really your story, which was interesting. But it raises the question a little bit of how necessary that there's something. It's a combined question. Is there something in your background that made you relate to it? Is it my stereotype of a Black man who might have grown up in a similar violent world that made my mind go there? And are there limits to telling stories, to our ability to relate to the underlying story as well? I think you did a great job. It just provoked all those questions.
Yeah, and I would say that while I didn't have all a parallel life to this person, I had some similar experiences, but it was really just like the outlook, the way this person reflected on gun culture. it just really spoke to me. And so, so that was why I felt so connected to it, more so than having lived it myself. And so I also, go into experiences like this. I'm in this room with 14 other people, and the expectation and actually the hope is that it's taken in different ways. If someone wonders, oh well, perhaps it's because what it must be like to be a black man in America. There are probably parallels to be found, right? Someone can see that. Someone can see something else, and all of the above is authentic if that is your experience, and that's part of what's good to talk about in situations like this. How is it that the story is received? How does it sit with you? How does your place in your life contribute to the way you receive the story? That's all part of the experience too. I think.
Someone else has a hand up. Just to echo, I think it was Megan's chat, because it did occur to me that it's also the job of an actor, and you are a good actor, to absorb the character, if you will, to become the character. So the insight, which is an interesting part of the insight process, is you hear the story, but you've got to become part of the story to be able to be an authentic performer, if you will. That you're also you're not just telling it, but you're performing the story as well.
Yeah, that's true. It is true. I am an actor, and at the same time, I think there's an element to acting that is being, and so I really try to intertwine as many factors as possible in creating art and reflecting and collaborating with reality in doing that. Crystal, you wanted to say something?
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute myself. First of all, thank you for giving your rendition of that story. I think for me, it was very evident of what was being felt. I think one of the great parts of it was the description of what was going on in the surroundings, especially when people experience trauma. What ends up happening is they start pulling in memories from really weird specific parts, like when you had said coffee. I was like, yes, that's what people who have experienced trauma go through. They just remember really weird specific smells, sights, names, sounds. And so I was glad that that was exposed, because that is the reality of people who experience stressful situations. It's not always perfectly remembered, but anyways, I when I got the invitation for this event, I was very excited, because I personally don't see enough people trying to use storytelling as a method of not just sharing our experiences, but having people understand what is happening, which I genuinely appreciate seeing you do, because for a background explanation, I do mediation and restorative justice. And so one of the bigger questions that we have in this field is, what do we do to really help people heal? And it's a two-step process of not only healing with the other person that committed the offense, but it's also with the internal healing of understanding what happened to you. So I've seen a lot of examples of storytelling being a huge key to helping people move on. And wondering your thoughts, because I'm deeply considering it down the line, of utilizing art and theater and acting and storytelling to really at the core of it, help people heal. The verbalization of a traumatic situation is not only something that therapists do in general and psychologists, but something that really liberates certain people and helping them to really put things together so that they can move forward instead of move on, because you never really move on, you more so move forward. And just wondering your thoughts, since I tried to read through your LinkedIn and the work that you do really briefly, your thoughts of integrating storytelling and healing and peace building, if that is something that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Crystal. I mean, yeah, I find art to be so important, because I see it. I approach it as a spiritual experience. I see it as an approach that can really encompass some of the corners that, or complement some of the to some of the corners that other approaches may not be able to touch on. And this is certainly not a knock on any approach, whether it be mediation or therapy or anything of that sort. We're trying, when we try to help people heal, we have different ways of doing that. Whether it's tracking memories, or if you take restorative justice, like really getting to the information that you could apologize for, and how you can rectify the situation. But there's also an opportunity to just have an experience that you can't quite articulate, where you just are able to encounter another person or another place and be changed. And I'm not saying that art is the only thing that can do that, but it certainly is something that can do that. And as someone who's, my entire life, has been theater, has been movement, dance, and I've seen, time and time again that performance can take people to a place where it's not just about entertainment, it's not just about escape, but it's about an examination of humanity in a way that might be hard to articulate in conversation. I think art can do that. So yeah, I would always be an advocate for the arts in healing, in spiritual, physical, mental healing. Sam knows what I'm talking about because we collaborate sometimes. With Sam being a playwright. I mentioned that I work with Rehab. So this is something that I've been working at for years, and so I truly believe in it. But thanks for asking that, Crystal.
Marnie, you should go. Your hand's up.
So, Chuk, I was so appreciative of the way that you prefaced it. The sort of your personal experience, and then even within the context of gun violence and this person who's writing a book about it. So it kind of situated me in both ways of like the kind of personal, and then that kind of like the broader, the context or the system. And then to go like really deeply into the experiences and to sort of that sense, I had the feeling of like being with that person in the way that Sam was talking about through you, and that the insight conversation, as you talked about it, that you were sort of, we talked about being so attuned that you were sort of, that the space you created together was, you were changed and that person likely was changed by you in that way, that there was some kind of reciprocation, who knows, but that you had taken this on so that you were able to deeply understand or deeply connect with that aspect to be able to artistically render it. And so that gave me the opportunity to be inside that person's head in a way that I wouldn't have been able to. Like, I'm not, but even, whether my insight conversation would have been very different than yours, but I was able to have that experience of both of you there. And so even that encounter of person, that I felt like I was encountered. So that kind of encountering of persons is already something very transformative for me. And then as you went along on this journey, that's framed by this question of like, what am I fighting for? What am I fighting against? And then how that flows its way through the story. So that we got all the stories of the fighting against and how that againstness kind of just kept building in all kinds of different ways. And then that moment of change, that we keep that kind of pivot. And one of the things I wonder is, because I was so relieved that you gave us that pivot, and whether there's always that sort of expansion I started to wonder about that. I was grateful for that, and that it became that kind of like, really, that's what we're fighting for, and why that question then emerged then. And you're saying, oh, maybe it was just kind of where my brain was developing, but that then there's some kind of answer that comes through with like, now I know what I'm fighting for. So there's an ambivalence there that I started to wonder. I wonder what he is fighting for. Like, is it like what that is? So that you left me with questions that I could kind of wonder through. So in terms of like, as we've been talking about our the craft of storytelling, and I love that question that just came before about this being like healing and connecting because of that encounter with persons, and as persons that we have a sense of brokenness and wholeness. But the two questions I had really were about that, about those sort of those magic moments, not that you have to answer it at all, about where there's becomes that kind of pivot towards like, what are we fighting for, and that kind of recognition of like, that wasn't it, and then being able to go on to this new path. And then the second one, just I think it's something that we can talk more about, as we go on as an EC community, about what going with the flow means, because sometimes there can be like an untrained flow, or like, so the way I would go with my flow in telling that story would not be as skilled as the way that you went with your flow. And so there's something about that flow that I think we can continue to explore.
Yeah. I think as much as I embrace going with the flow, I always there are some elements that I anticipate in conversations like this. When talking to this person, I was anticipating that there would be a moment of pivot, or a moment of aha. The last story I told, and I know a lot of you got to hear that last story that I told about my friend who had started this nonprofit. The whole story was called The Point of Motivation. So in these two conversations I've had now, I would go into the conversation thinking, I'm going to ask at some point, okay, so what changed? Or at what point did it change? What was the moment? I never had to ask that question, because all I knew was that something remarkable happened in this person's life, and I want them to talk about it. And it just so happens that aha moment is part of it, and I'm just sitting back and it's just happening. And so, and I'm like, all right, universe. So like, this is part of what going with the flow looks like. It's when the expectations that are supposed to be met are going to be met. You don't even need to ask the question, and that's a beautiful thing. And so yeah, if that's a response to your question, Marnie, that's that's how I felt hearing what you were saying.
Yeah, thank you. That was very satisfying.
Oh, Megan.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. I was just putting the link to your previous story in the chat in case anybody wants to Watch that. If you scroll all the way down, it's there and it's wonderful. Really. And so is this one. Oh my God, talk about being transported by your words really into a totally different place. And just the quality of intimacy was, I mean, beyond really something that one rarely gets to experience. So I just thought that was incredible. And I'm curious too, and I think this is Kim's question, along the lines of Kim's question, is really, you know, the process, and you've been pulling it out a little bit, and you said at the beginning you had no idea that this was the story that you were going to write. So what did you do? What did you do? What did you ask to arrive at this story?
What I did was I asked one like general question that pertained to what I thought the conversation was going to be about. And then what immediately came out of the person's mouth basically said to me, okay, this is what it is. And so I'm like, okay, cool. And I sat back and it was a combination of uh-huhs and keep going and tell me more about that. And then any other question that came up, it would just be in response to what I was hearing. And so but the application of insight is in the fact that there is, you know, there is a sharing of experiencing, and there is a sharing of verification. There is a sharing of valuing and deliberating and evaluating and deciding. That's always part of it. And then in between that, you know, you start to latch on certain elements of the story, you know, that speak to the experience of like being able to take apart your own mind and examine how you're processing life. You know, what stood out to me in this conversation, you know, one of the first things the person said, which I put early on in the story, was, you know, a lot of shit happened to me, and it made me who I am today. And so I wouldn't change a thing, but at the same time, I kind of would. You know, and that ability to look back and wonder about whether I would or should do anything differently and how that might change or impact decisions I'm making in the present. So we were already in the world of insight 3 minutes into our conversation, because that was kind of how it started, you know. And so essentially in having an insight conversation, because it was such in that I was sitting there tracking this person's process of how, you know, they assess their life experiences. And then the storytelling that comes from that is, you know, me getting creative about it, you know, but the insight application is from the conversation that precedes the story. And then in the story, you know, I tried to capture some of those moments as they impacted me in the story. And so if that makes sense, that's how I apply insight in the storytelling. It's really in the conversation at first that we're most.
It does make sense. It's really useful and helpful. And I think as you're talking, what's striking is how affirming it is, right? So this individual had a lot that he would change, but if he changed any of it, he wouldn't be standing over his 2 daughters in the light of the moon.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. There you go. That's it.
It's just beautiful.
Thank you.
If I may, I have 2 comments and wonderful gratitude for being part of this. I'm really grateful for just receiving the story, right? But I'm curious how the person that lived the story received your words. If you ever told the story to this person, if this person ever heard the performance, if this person ever gave you validation, confirmation that in a way you found for him words that he may not have found. You also use quite an interesting, sophisticated language and wording and so on. So it's an interesting exercise. The second comment that is completely different is that I watched yesterday this movie that is running these days on The Lost Daughter. And my reaction to your story is that this is the story of the found father. It's the father that finds himself in this beautiful relationship with the daughters in such a way that he himself is able to tell the story in a way that brings it together in a wholeness that in a way is given to him. So I was touched when you said at the closing, this is my story, because clearly like some there was this ambiguity about the ownership, it's your story in a sense that you are the one telling the story in that sense. But there is this beautiful sense of whose stories is this, in this sense there is in a way sort of an intuitive idea and an inside story that is the spirit that is speaking, that life is speaking, and is speaking through this father that is found himself in the light of the moon with the daughters, sleeping and happy and quiet, and with the wife, asleep, and it's a beautiful way of bringing life together.
So to speak to your first comment, I will say that my favorite part of this entire process is the experience of the person reading the story that I wrote about them. And in both situations, this being my second time doing this, the proposal to where I would approach them and say, hey, I want to write a story about you, the response was somewhere in the realm of, okay, right? But I think there's something about the experience of seeing yourself through someone's eyes, and and to take it a step further, seeing yourself through someone's eyes in the context of a particular experience that meant so much in your life. So the first story I told back in November, and he was on the call. He was very deeply moved by it. When I sent him the story the day before, and he wrote me back sobbing, and then he shared the story with all of his coworkers, and they all have a copy of it now. So it was really magical. And in this situation, this friend of mine is a little more stoic at times, and so I sent the person the story, and they just sent me a text message that simply said, "You're Superman," and that was it. And that's good enough for me. And we'll debrief some more later, but it really makes me feel that because the concern is, am I being intrusive? This isn't really my story, and at the same time, I kind of feel like this is what a journalist does, and there is a journalist element to interviewing and then taking that and then telling the stories. So it's really just about building that trust and being able to articulate those intentions in a way that the other person both understands it and embraces it. And so in both situations, that has been the case. I don't know if that'll always be the case, but I'm grateful that it has been, and the response certainly tells me to keep doing it. But yeah, that's definitely my favorite part. And that movie, I've heard of the movie. I've never seen it, but I'm inclined to check it out. So to your second comment, thank you. I thought I saw your hand, Crystal, but then it went away. Yeah, we have 3 minutes, so if there are any other thoughts to be shared or final thoughts to be shared.
Can I just ask real quick? I forgot who mentioned it, but was it you, Megan, who made the observation that if anything had not happened, then he would not have been standing there with his two children, or was that somebody else? Is that you? You know, that's for a different time and place, perhaps it's not a small point. I happen to be that, you know, jump into it for a bit. I'm almost at that point in my own life where I look back at everything that happened in my life, and some good, some really bad, and people, you know, or there have been times where people say, what one thing would you have changed in your life? And said nothing, because I wouldn't be here today. But that's Chuck's story made me question that answer, which is interesting, which is why I'm sort of talking, which is because I've had bad things and I've had people die, and I haven't had violence like that in my life. And I wonder, it made me, because my first reaction was, of course he wouldn't have wanted to have his dog shot. But maybe even that one little thing meant he would not have had to do it. I think that's a terribly philosophical, or wonderfully philosophical and difficult question. And it's provoked by the story. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, it's the thing about, you know, life experiences like that, they could be so unique, and yet we still could find a way to be connected to them, and certainly to the person who's lived it. And in this case, you're not meeting the actual person behind the story, and the story resonates all the same. And so that in itself makes this a worthwhile experience. So with that, I want to express my gratitude to all of you for.
Is Sabrina's hand up? I can't tell.
Oh, is there a hand up that I'm missing?
Thank you. Yes, my name is Sabina, and thank you very much for it was a very moving narrative. And I think what you were talking about before is that this idea of witnessing, and sometimes like very big things happen, and sometimes big things happen to small people, to children, and nobody's there really to witness, you know, and so I think the witness is such, you know, in retelling the story, in such an important practice. But what stood out also is how this gun violence culture can be so devastating, and at the same time very commonplace. You know, it's just like part of your. And I'm here in New York, and I, you know, like yesterday, for example, a girl, a 19-year-old girl on 116th Street, a cashier at Burger King, was shot and killed. And it just like, it just happens all the time, right? And it's tragic, and yet it's just like so part of life. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And it's true. It is part of life. And yeah, I mean, that the Burger King story, I live close by there, and so I was just hearing about that last night. And you know, I just hope to not get desensitized, and also having two kids like this person, I hope they don't get desensitized, you know. So yeah, thank you all again. Come on back. This isn't the last story that I'll tell, and so I would love for you to come on back next time it happens. Making sure I'm getting the comments here. Great. Great. I'll make sure I save these comments too. So y'all have a good night.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. Hope to see you again. And recording here.